The night was quiet on Elmwood Drive, the kind of suburban stillness where crickets out-hummed the occasional passing car.
Welcome to Shadow Crime. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
Judge Reginald Hayes, a man who'd spent decades wielding gavels and upholding justice, was almost home. His sleek, black Lexus purred along, a reward for years of late nights and hard-earned victories in the courtroom. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and a voice that could calm a storm, he was a pillar in his community, respected, steady, unshakable, until the red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Officer Simmons didn't stroll up casually. He swaggered, flashlight blinding, barking orders like Reginald was a fugitive caught red-handed. "Out of the car! Hands where I can see 'em!" Simmons snapped, his tone dripping with suspicion. Reginald frowned, stepping out slowly, suit crisp despite the late hour. "I'm a judge," he said, sliding his court ID across the hood. "This is my street. What's this about?" Simmons barely glanced at the card, smirking. "Nice car for this neighborhood. Where'd you get it?" The words landed like a slap, sharp, cutting, loaded. Reginald's chest tightened. He wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving. The only crime? A black man driving a Lexus near his own damn house. Simmons rummaged through the car, tossing papers, probing for something, anything to justify the stop. He found nothing, but the damage was done. Reginald stood there, humiliated, the weight of eyes from a neighbor's window pressing into him. Simmons finally shrugged, muttering, "Watch yourself," before peeling off. But Reginald didn't move, not right away. The cool night air couldn't soothe the heat rising in his gut. He'd seen cases like this, heard the stories, but feeling it? That was new, that was personal. Back in his study, the judge's mind raced. This wasn't just about him. How many others, working folks, kids, families, got the same treatment, no badge or title to shield them? Simmons's smug face wasn't a fluke, it was a symptom. Reginald grabbed a notepad, pen scratching furiously. He'd worn the robe long, enough to know justice wasn't blind, not yet. This stop wasn't the end, it was a beginning. He'd dig deeper, unearth the rot. Because if a judge could be targeted, who was safe? One man's wake-up call could shake a system. Stick around. This fight's just starting. Judge Reginald Hayes wasn't sleeping much these days. His study had become a war room, papers strewn across the desk, coffee mugs stacking up like evidence of a man possessed. That humiliating traffic stop had lit a fuse, and now he was chasing the smoke. Then came Brian Lewis, a detective with tired eyes and a conscience that wouldn't quit. Brian slid into Reginald's office late one night, glancing over his shoulder like the walls might snitch. "You're not crazy, Judge," he muttered, dropping a thick file on the desk. "It's bigger than Simmons, way bigger." Reginald flipped through the pages. Reports, tickets, arrest logs. A pattern screamed out, random stops, bogus fines, all hitting the same neighborhoods. Working-class streets where folks drove beat-up Toyotas, not Lexuses like his. Black families, Latino families, people scraping by. The fines piled up fast, hundreds turning into thousands until they couldn't pay. Then the foreclosures hit. Houses snatched up dirt cheap, gone before the ink dried. And who was buying? Prime Builders, a slick real estate giant with glossy ads and deep pockets. They'd flip those homes into strip malls and condos, raking in millions while the evicted vanished into the margins. It wasn't random, it was a machine. Reginald's hands shook as he connected the dots. Cops like Simmons weren't just flexing power. They were enforcers, shaking down the vulnerable to grease the wheels. Local officials signed off, pocketing cuts, while Prime Builders played puppet master. Brian leaned in, voice low. "They've been at it for years. Harass, fine, foreclose, profit. Anyone who complains, more tickets, or worse." Reginald's jaw clenched. His stop wasn't a fluke. It was a glimpse into a web of corruption so rotten it stank. He stared out his window, the quiet street mocking him. How many neighbors had already lost everything to this scheme? How many nights had he ruled from the bench, blind to the game playing out under his nose? No more. He grabbed his phone, texting Brian, "We're exposing this." All of it. The detective's reply buzzed back, "You sure? They'll fight dirty." Reginald typed one word. Good. A judge and a cop versus a corrupt empire. What's their next move? Hit that like button. This scandal's about to blow wide open. The clock ticked past midnight, but Reginald Hayes and Brian Lewis weren't slowing down. In a cramped back room of Reginald's house, they turned into shadows, hunched over laptops, sifting through a mountain of files. Legal docs, bank records, leaked emails. They pieced it together like a puzzle from hell. Brian, chain-smoking despite Reginald's glares, had tapped his network of honest cops. What he found made his stomach turn. "They're scared, Judge," he said, voice rough. "Bosses lean on them. Hit these streets, rack up tickets, or you're out. It's not choice, it's orders." The evidence piled up like bricks in a wall. Prime Builders' fingerprints were everywhere. Wire transfers to cops' private accounts. Hush money to City Hall suits. Reginald found a memo, cold as ice. "Clear the block. We break ground in 6 months." They weren't just profiting off misery. They were engineering it, bribing their way past every law he'd sworn to uphold. Brian dug up a recording, some sweaty sergeant grumbling about keeping the quotas up, and Reginald's blood boiled. This wasn't a few bad apples. It was a damn orchard. Then the heat turned up. A black SUV started circling Reginald Street, slow and deliberate. Brian's phone buzzed with a text. "Back off, or you're done." They weren't. Subtle, just desperate. Reginald caught a shadow outside his window one night, heart pounding, but he didn't flinch. "They're scared," he told Brian, slamming a fist on the table. "Good, means we're close." Brian nodded, stubbing out a cigarette. Or, "They're crazy enough to bury us." They kept going, snapping photos of shady handoffs, taping whistleblower confessions. Every scrap was gold, every risk a step toward justice. The threats loomed, but Reginald saw faces in his mind. Families evicted, lives crushed. He wasn't stopping. Not now. Brian cracked a grim smile. "You're one stubborn bastard, Judge," Reginald smirked back. "Takes one to know one. Will their evidence topple the beast or get them silenced? Don't miss what's next. This is heating up fast." The air crackled with stakes as Judge Reginald Hayes and Detective Brian Lewis made their move. No more shadows, no more whispers. They were taking this fight to the spotlight. They teamed up with Channel 7 Investigates, a gritty news crew known for gut-punching exposés. The studio lights blazed, cameras rolled, and Reginald stood tall, his voice steady as granite. "This isn't just about me," he began, holding up a stack of damning files. "It's about a system rigged to ruin lives." Brian flanked him, tossing out evidence like grenades, bank records, bribe logs, emails so dirty they stank through. The screen. The broadcast was a bombshell. They played audio of a cop griping about quotas, flashed emails from prime builders promising bonuses for cleared blocks, and aired tearful interviews. Families who'd lost homes to this. Meat grinder of greed. Reginald's traffic stop just the tip of the iceberg. The screen split with footage of evictions, then cut to a slick prime builder's billboard. "They profited off pain," Brian growled, "and the cops were their muscle." The anchor's jaw dropped live on air. Viewers, they lost it. Phones lit up across the city. Expose Prime trended in minutes. TikTok flooded with reaction vids, kids shouting, "Yo, they robbed us blind." By morning, the streets thrummed with fury. Protesters swarmed City Hall, signs blazing, "Jail the corrupt! Justice now!" Cars honked in solidarity. Old ladies waved fists from porches. The broadcast hit millions. YouTube clips racked up views faster than the station could refresh. Reginald's face was everywhere. A judge turned avenger. Brian's too, the rogue cop who'd flipped the script. The backlash was unstoppable. Within hours, the mayor blinked, announcing a full investigation. Officer Simmons? Suspended. His smirk wiped clean as he ducked cameras. Half a dozen officials followed, badges yanked, offices locked. Prime Builders' stock tanked, their PR flailing with a weak no comment. Reginald watched the chaos unfold from his porch, Brian at his side, nursing a coffee. "Think it's enough?" Brian asked. Reginald's eyes glinted. "It's a start. The city's awake and it's pissed. Will the big dogs fall or fight back? Smash that subscribe. This showdown's not over." The dust hadn't even settled, but Judge Reginald Hayes and Detective Brian Lewis were already feeling the heat. Their TV bombshell had cracked the city wide open, and the big dogs weren't happy. Late-night calls hissed threats. "You're done, Hayes." While Brian's tires got slashed in broad daylight, a brick sailed through Reginald's window, a jagged note taped on, "Back off." Power doesn't bow easy, and these two had just kicked a hornet's nest. But they weren't. Blinking, they'd seen worse. Reginald in courtrooms, Brian in alleys, and they'd started something bigger than the payback. The streets wouldn't let it die. Protests swelled. Hashtags like Reginald Rising and Clean the Cops glued to every feed. TikTok teens stitched videos of the expose with "This is our fight" captions. YouTube streams looped the broadcast, comments raging, "Lock 'em all up." The roar was deafening. Thousands marching, demanding blood and reform. City Hall buckled under the weight. The mayor, sweating bullets on live TV, promised a top-to-bottom overhaul. A new task force rolled out, cops and officials now, under a microscope, forced to wear transparency like a badge. Simmons and his cronies, still suspended, drowning in inquiries. Prime Builders execs lawyered up, but their empire was crumbling. Reginald and Brian met at a diner, the kind with cracked booths and coffee that burned going down. "They'll keep coming," Brian said, rubbing a bruised knuckle. Reginald nodded, staring out at the city skyline. "Let 'em. We've got the people now." They weren't naive. Poking this beast meant scars, but the tide had turned. Families waved at Reginald on the street. Kids asked Brian for selfies. They'd lit a match and the fire wasn't dying out. The task force wasn't perfect. The threats weren't gone, but the system, it was shaking. The story doesn't tie up neat. Justice isn't a gavel slam, it's a grind. But as Reginald watched a protest banner rise, truth wins. He felt it, a shift, unstoppable. Brian smirked, tossing a dime on the table. "Round 2, Reginald grinned. "You bet." The war's not won, but the battle's begun. Will hope hold or will power strike back? Hit follow. This isn't the end. The tale of Judge Reginald Hayes and Detective Brian Lewis offers profound lessons, especially for those who've journeyed through many seasons of life. First, it reminds us that age doesn't diminish worth or the power to spark change. Reginald, a man who thought he knew justice, awoke to its flaws and fought back, risking everything. For the elderly, this is a call to recognize your strength. The years you've lived aren't just memories. They're a well of wisdom and resilience, a tool to stand for what's right, even in your own quiet corner of the world. Moreover, the story reveals a harsh truth. Injustice spares no one, not even those shielded by status. Yet it was unity, the community's outrage, their collective voice, that forced the corrupt to their knees. For older folks, this underscores the power of sharing. You may not march in the streets anymore, but your stories, your counsel, can ignite inspiration in a grandchild, a neighbor, or a friend. Your voice, seasoned by time, can ripple outward, fueling change bigger than you might imagine. One, timely. Word can light a path others follow. Finally, this battle teaches patience and hope. Justice isn't swift, but every small step, like Reginald and Brian's defiance, plants seeds for tomorrow. The elderly know this well. Life is a marathon of persistence, and your legacy isn't in instant victories, but in the values you sow. Live so your later years aren't just rest, but a lighthouse guiding others. Bravely facing darkness, trusting light will break through, even if you don't see it yourself. Reginald and Brian proved that grey hair doesn't mean surrender. It can mean shaking walls others thought unbreakable. So hold fast. Your twilight isn't an ending. It's a chance to show that courage and purpose don't fade, offering a steady hand to a world still finding its way.